You think that people going to see the Toxic Avenger would know what they were in for, but this, like many other movie audiences have walked out of, is not exactly what everyone who bought a ticket signed up for.
Oh, me, why didn't you tell me that first?
When details of the modern reboot of Toxic Avenger were announced, something was missing. Toxie, once a hideously deformed creature of superhuman size and strength, now played by Peter Dinklage in human form, was lacking in the superhero-sized department. Fans were already skeptical. Without creator Lloyd Kaufman directly at the helm of the notoriously grotesque series, hopes for a solid Toxic Avenger reboot were pretty low. And if you believe the movie's reportedly high walkout rate, as reported by Screen Rant, you might see that as confirmation of a poorly performing film. But if you know anything about the Toxic Avenger, you'll see that it's getting exactly the reaction director Macon Blair wants, and the reason is slightly more complex. Currently resting around an 87% fresh rating on Rotten Tomatoes, it seems like the Toxic Avenger is just too much for many unfamiliar viewers who may be expecting a slightly offbeat superhero or horror film. What they got instead at their screenings was an intentionally unhinged assault of the senses, perfectly aligned with the legacy of the Toxic Avenger. It's a movie series that sees Toxie urinating on the devil, a diaper mafia, and an unbelievable amount of gratuitous nudity. The rumors of walkout seem to be based entirely on an ex-post about a screening at Odeon Cinemas in the UK during a Scream Unseen event. For the uninitiated, that's when people buy movie tickets to a horror movie without knowing what's actually going to be playing until the titles start. While clues about what's going to be playing are dropped ahead of time, the clues for Toxic Avenger were pretty ambiguous, calling it a big hit, independently disruptive, and weirdest of all, using the word scapegoat. According to Odeon, the latter refers to Peter Dinklage's role in Game of Thrones, so it's not surprising that theatergoers had no idea what they were headed into.
He looks like a up hot dog.
That part was very shocking, mother.
Even those who stuck around after their initial disappointment in a movie that may not totally qualify as horror didn't all make it through the movie. According to reports, as many as 40 people walked out of one screening in Ireland, unable to endure the comic absurdity of mop-based ultraviolence. Theatergoers all over the UK listed similar numbers in Facebook comments under the event. As one Facebook commenter on an Odeon screening stated, "Daft fun, but it's definitely a Marmite film." Another comment assessed that the movie was wasted on a general audience. Most commenters agreed. Anyone who knew they were going to see a Toxie movie would have stayed, and that trauma movies aren't for everyone. It's not as though the movie wasn't already facing an uphill battle. Movie fans are experiencing serious reboot fatigue as studios churn out sequels and modernizations of well-loved movies. But it's not as though Toxie hasn't been rebooted and reimagined many times already. Toxic Avenger Part 4 began by saying that the last two movies didn't happen.
2 rotten sequels were made. Sorry about that. This is the real sequel.
Character names don't even remain consistent between movies. The multiple Toxic Avenger comic series all have a different take on Toxie. And the Toxic Crusaders cartoon didn't see Toxie battling the effects of corporate greed, but aliens from the planet Smogula. The sight of a smaller Toxie didn't inspire confidence, but Peter Dinklage and Superformer Luisa Guerrero have delivered a character with both pathos and the ability to rip off someone's face with a mop. Don't let the walkout stop you from seeing Toxic Avenger where you can. By all reports, those walking out were people who didn't expect to sit down to a Toxic Avenger movie. Reviewers confirmed that the newest entry to the series is just as niche as the first 4, and that's not a bad thing.
The Toxic Avenger is finally coming to your town. Show the out.
Curious about what other movies have sparked these kinds of reactions? We have so many stories to tell on that front.
Even seasoned film critics and industry insiders felt the dizzying effects of French daredevil Philippe Petit walking a tightrope between Manhattan's Twin Towers in 2015's The Walk. The 3D biopic recreates the notorious 1974 stunt in ways that past mediums, including a memoir and a documentary, could not. And that included making people leave the theater to vomit. CBS News even advised people to avoid large meals before attending a screening, reporting that at least 10% of audiences were getting physically ill. All previous footage of Petit's heart-stopping stroll between the skyscrapers, which he completed 8 times over 45 minutes without a safety net or harness, was captured from the ground or the buildings. The thing that neither the book nor the documentary could do was actually put the audience up on the wire with Philippe, director Robert Zemeckis told Vanity Fair. "We did, and that is what movies are all about." That and, apparently, barfing. In 2003, outdoorsman Aaron Ralston became trapped in a slot canyon in Utah for 127 hours, his right arm pinned by a boulder. To escape, he sawed off his own arm with a dull pocket knife. In 2010, director Danny Boyle released a movie starring James Franco about the true story, but when viewers arrived at that pivotal scene, many couldn't hack it. Movie Line compiled reports of fainting, vomiting, and seizures at film festivals and screenings across the country. Franco told Vulture, "It's meant to be an intense, personal, immersive experience, and when he cuts off his arm, maybe it feels like it's happening to you." Despite the suffering of moviegoers, the film was nominated for 6 Academy Awards, including Best Picture and Best Actor. So let's give the film a hand. It really needs one. While film scholars called Tree of Life a masterpiece, the man on the street asked for his money back. Terrence Malick's experimental drama explores many themes: the creation of the world, the meaning of life, the conflict between science and religion, and the bond between family, which is a lot for any movie to handle. Tree of Life dropped the ball. Maybe it was just too much for the average date night because folks left the movie in droves. They weren't scared or grossed out, they just didn't like it. Despite an 85% Metacritic rating, disputes about refunds arose and theaters scrambled to make their policies clear. According to the New York Times, the Avon Theater in Connecticut posted a sign urging customers to read up on the film before choosing to see it, because it was not issuing refunds. Other cinemas agreed to reimbursements for those who left within 30 minutes, and Brad Pitt laughed all the way to the bank. If this 2008 found-footage horror film makes you lose your lunch, fear not, you're not alone. So many people got sick during screenings that some cinemas began posting warning signs. In the movie, 6 Manhattan millennials are attending a party when a gigantic monster attacks the city. Their experience is documented on a personal video camera later recovered by the U.S. Department of Defense. The footage is so jerky that bucketfuls of popcorn were regurgitated in cinema seats, bathrooms, and the expansive floor between the seats and the bathrooms. Because instances of nausea were so prevalent, WebMD even wrote an article about the specific motion sickness phenomenon, stating, "While watching Cloverfield, viewers were sitting still in their seats, so their inner ear was telling their body they were motionless, but the bumpy camera movements and their eyes misled them into thinking they were moving erratically." Similar side effects occurred during screenings of the Blair Witch Project in 1998. Fortunately, Cloverfield's first quasi-spin-off, the 2016 hit 10 Cloverfield Lane, dispensed with the jiggly camera work, opting for good old-fashioned jiggly John Goodman instead.
Alexander Aja's remake of The Hills Have Eyes about a group of desert-dwelling mutants was unsettling enough just based on the characters' physical deformities alone. So when a whole gang of the crazed cretins started attacking one family in gratuitously terrible ways, it was simply too much, sending some theater patrons sprinting away. What made the film especially difficult to endure was how no one was safe from the clutches of these creatures, not even the dog or the baby. This 1975 Pier Paolo Pasolini pick still finds its way on almost every best-worst list of the genre, even decades after its release. It was an exceptionally graphic depiction of the nightmarish scenario that might unfold for a group of children who'd been abducted by fascists in war-torn Europe. From mutilation to the forced consumption of excrement, the most unimaginable horrors were realized in this commonly walked out of film. The film was inspired by some of the darkest literary works of all time, including Dante's Divine Comedy, and seems to explore the depths of inhumanity presented in the existentialist take on the nature of human evil presented in the Marquis de Sade's Justine. Despite earning critical favor and timeless relevance, it's still incredibly hard to sit through. Not everyone has a taste for cannibalism, and the massive walkouts and festival booing that the unrated 2001 horror drama Trouble Every Day by Claire Denis earned is proof. The movie introduces an American couple honeymooning in Paris, but the husband is really on a mission to track down the wife of a fellow doctor he'd been obsessed with. What he finds when he locates the couple is that the woman who's the object of his obsession has a nasty habit of seducing men and eating them, living out her darkest desires in explicit visual detail. The movie wasn't meant to be such a seat emptier. As Denis herself once said, "I don't set out to shock. That's not my way of doing things. I don't think it's explicit, and the cannibalism, it is how a kiss becomes a bite." If you say so, lady. And while we're on that subject, this gory flick is about the effect of a bug bite gone very, very wrong. But it was the audience that really got infected when Bite premiered at the Fantasia International Film Festival. The Pix producers were reportedly prepared in advance for the rampant upset stomachs that would follow the screening and even passed out barf bags to attendees. But that didn't stop people from exiting the flick early. For those who haven't braved the vom-inducing experience, it's about a bachelorette whose celebratory trip to Costa Rica goes way off course when she's bitten by a bug that she thinks is harmless. But the infection turns her into a murderous loon whose body slowly morphs into an insect herself. Reviewers who panned the film chided its illogical homage to David Cronenberg's The Fly, but some still found favor in director Chad Archibald's use of gruesome screen tactics, and almost everyone had to skip a meal or two after viewing it whether they liked the movie or not. This 1979 take on the Roman emperor, whose notorious sexual appetite and penchant for cruelty marked his tyrannical reign and prompted his eventual assassination, was so exceedingly violent that even famed reviewer Roger Ebert took leave of it early. His scathing review was so harsh that he actually feared it might entice audiences to check it out simply because they, quote, simply cannot believe any film could be this vile. He went on, writing, "Some of those people were walking out of the theater before I did. Others were sitting depressed in the lobby." Ebert's assessment was echoed by many of his peers, as the film was consistently slammed by even those who did manage to sit through its full 2.5-hour runtime. Pascal Laugier's 2008 revenge horror flick is widely regarded as one of the most unsparingly violent movies ever made. The film, which follows two young women on a maniacal payback mission to hunt down their former abusers, featured several scenes of extreme depravity and sent many audience members packing along the way. The movie was willfully provocative and prompted revulsion even in viewers with a relatively strong constitution. This unrated Turkish fantasy horror movie featured a group of police officers who inadvertently waltzed through a door to hell and left many moviegoers heading right out the door to the theater. The macabre movie was relatively well received by critics who savored all its devilish delights, but during its debut, there were walkouts galore. Baskin's writer-director Con Evernall admitted the last few minutes were a bit much for them. Whether it was the nightmarish bloodbaths or the philosophical overtures of the demonic beings, there were plenty of disgusting moments to be seen and fled from in this ghastly movie. Probably not a great date movie. Probably.
Stanley Kubrick's adaptation of Anthony Burgess's chilling novel was instantly considered brilliant, dangerous, and also a little maddening. Actor Malcolm McDowell said he saw people walking out of screenings in droves, with many viewers outraged by the ultra-violent content. Although Kubrick stood by the movie, a rash of copycat crimes in England convinced the studio to pull it from theaters there. Meanwhile, it became a smash in the US. After all, Americans do love to dance.
And I'm singing, just singing.
Everyone knows flatulence can clear a room, but when Sundance Film Festival audiences got a whiff of Swiss Army Man, it nearly emptied the theater, according to Variety. Why? Well, Daniel Radcliffe plays a rotting corpse that Paul Dano's character rides like a jet ski, propelled only by Radcliffe's, natural gas. The movie wasn't a total stinker though. Critics have given it mostly favorable reviews.
Weird. People don't like other people's farts.
While the low budget of the Blair Witch Project brought an exceptional financial return to Artisan Films, it did cost a lot of viewers their lunches. The shaky found footage-style camera work had people hitting the deck, and not necessarily out of fear. Many audience members walked out due to nausea and panic attacks, while others gave up due to the movie's slow pace.
It's not the same log, Mike.
Hey, there's nothing scarier than evil logs, and not the poopy kind. Warner Brothers marketed The Exorcist as something beyond comprehension, and for a lot of theatergoers in 1973, that was exactly right. Thanks to word of mouth, the film became a must-see event, but once the frames started rolling, many people couldn't handle what they were seeing, such as a horrifying image of a little girl twisting her head completely around, or, well, pretty much anything else from the movie. Plenty of people were too grossed out or terrified to finish the film, but others left because they were offended by the religious implications. Hey, some religions just don't like pea soup.
Sacrilegious.
Quentin Tarantino's directorial debut established him as a true talent, and the film's torture scene still serves as a yardstick by which the concept of twisted is measured. The now iconic scene was too gory for some people though, and it prompted many early exits. But Tarantino took it as a compliment. He said, "It never bothered me when people walked out, it just meant the scene worked." A little too well. Famous horror makeup artist Rick Baker left a screener during the scene, saying he was in a business of fantasy-based scares, and Tarantino was dealing with real-life violence. Tarantino's second movie won him an Oscar for Best Screenplay, but the film wasn't universally beloved when it came out. The non-linear storytelling, graphic violence, and rape scenes led to walkouts, with Tarantino famously being heckled during his acceptance speech for the prestigious Palme d'Or at the Cannes Film Festival, and those who walked out were luckier than some others who had to be carried out. The scene in which John Travolta thrusts a hypodermic needle into Uma Thurman's chest caused multiple audience members to faint. The Circle of Life may sound beautiful in song, but some kids and their parents didn't think it was so fantastic when King Mufasa was gruesomely murdered on screen by way of a wildebeest stampede.
Great idea! Who needs a king? No king, no king, la la la.
Many shocked parents had to remove their horrified children from the audience.
Pumba, not in front of the kids.
Guess it gives a whole new meaning to the term scarred for life. Am I right, lads, or am I right, lads? Because the bad guy, his name is Scar. Do you get it? Please, anyone?
Danish director Lars von Trier is known for making dark, upsetting art house fare that celebrated and denounced in equal measure. He's also known for causing a stir at the Cannes Film Festival. AFP reported that at least 4 people fainted in 2009 during the Cannes screening of his experimental horror film Antichrist. But his 2018 showing at Cannes was his most controversial yet.
Help! There's a murderer in the building! It's Mr. Sophistication!
The Independent reported more than 100 walkouts in the middle of The House That Jack Built, which stars Matt Dillon as a child-mutilating serial killer. One disgusted moviegoer told Deadline, "It was like spending 2 hours in hell." The film still received a standing ovation from those left in attendance, with one Guardian critic raving that the finale in particular was, quote, spectacular. Director Paul Thomas Anderson has amassed a considerable amount of cred with critics and casual moviegoers alike, with films such as Boogie Nights and There Will Be Blood. But his star-studded 2014 adaptation of Thomas Pynchon's 70s noir novel Inherent Vice caused enough audience walkouts for the media to take notice, thanks to the power of Twitter. Steve Rose of The Guardian wrote about the online reaction in a piece subtitled, "How to Make a Film Your Audience Will Be Dying to Leave." Rose gathered several walkout tweets from prominent UK writers baffled by the Joaquin Phoenix-led flick, including one from novelist Philip Hensher, who tweeted, "Understood so little of plot or dialogue I worried I'd had a stroke." But it wasn't an isolated phenomenon. Rose reported that the internet was buzzing with similar reports, including, "Saw Inherent Vice and at least a quarter of the audience walked out. I couldn't sit through more than an hour of Inherent Vice," and 50% walkout rate is highest I've seen in a while. Many viewers found the dark comedy incomprehensible and boring, but a lot of critics were impressed with the movie, calling it a faithful adaptation of the equally puzzling source material. If you're willing to put in the time, Jordan Hoffman from Vanity Fair advises it's far more rewarding if you watch it twice. Leonardo DiCaprio finally won his first Academy Award for his starring role in the brutal wilderness revenge epic, The Revenant. But when the film was first screened for awards voters in November 2015, many Academy members in attendance reportedly couldn't handle the movie's more gruesome moments, including the now famous bear attack. Scott Feinberg of The Hollywood Reporter noted, "Several people walked out throughout the movie, apparently unable to take the gore." Film historian and critic Leonard Maltin later expressed doubts about the film's chances for Oscar glory, explaining, "The older members of the Academy will accept a certain amount of violence if the balance of the film pleases them. But if, as they leave the theater, the lingering thought is how violent it was, that can be a detriment." In the case of The Revenant, several Academy members left the theater early because of the violence, but director Alejandro G. Iñárritu still won his 4th Oscar, and the film was nominated in 12 categories, the most of any film that year.
Despite being a billion-dollar franchise, the Transformers films have never been without their throngs of critics who roundly reject them as poorly written excuses to splash big-budget effects all over the screen. Horror legend Stephen King once famously remarked on Twitter that the first Transformers was the only movie he'd ever walked out on. But it's the second Transformers movie, Revenge of the Fallen, that seems to have drawn most people's ire online. On Reddit, Revenge of the Fallen regularly pops up in topics where users ask what movies people walked out on. With a thin story, several extremely annoying characters, and an excessive runtime of 2.5 hours, it's no surprise viewers wanted out early.
Now That's rude.
But before you jump to blaming director Michael Bay, know that he might not have been entirely at fault. Just before production on the film was set to kick off, the Writers Guild of America went on strike, forcing Bay and his team into a crunch to deliver a script. According to Bay himself, they had just 3 weeks to turn in a story. And with that, the whole thing makes a lot more sense. Although even star Shia LaBeouf criticized the film for lacking heart, it still wound up with nearly $900 million in box office receipts. Today, the 1968 sci-fi epic 2001: A Space Odyssey is seen as one of the most groundbreaking films in the genre. Directed by the legendary Stanley Kubrick, its impact on science fiction is immeasurable, with countless cinephiles hailing it as a breathtaking achievement in cinema. However, there are just as many people, both then and now, who hate the movie for its slow, plodding, and often dialogue-free story. Audiences have been baffled by the film for decades, and when it was initially released, that befuddlement led many to outright reject it. If reports are to be believed, the premiere of 2001 in New York saw not just individual walkouts, not even dozens, but nearly 250 disgruntled patrons exit the screening. According to The Hollywood Reporter, a separate screening in Los Angeles led to a similar exodus, with star actor Rock Hudson allegedly asking, "What is this bullshit?" Reviews of the film were decidedly mixed, with some lauding the film for its scope, scale, and jaw-dropping visual storytelling. However, just as many people heaped hate on the movie, calling it a slow drag that went nowhere and achieved nothing. Writer, actor, and director David Cronenberg is no stranger to films so grotesque that they repulse moviegoers. As the master of body horror, that's kind of his bread and butter. From his earliest films like The Brood and Videodrome to the mainstream hit The Fly, Cronenberg has always reveled in his trademark nausea-inducing visuals. Given his track record, a wave of walkouts for his 2022 film Crimes of the Future could have easily been predicted by anyone. And it was by Cronenberg himself. The filmmaker told Deadline, "There are some very strong scenes. I mean, I'm sure that we will have walkouts within the first 5 minutes of the movie. I'm sure of that. Some people who have seen the film have said that they think the last 20 minutes will be very hard on people and that there'll be a lot of walkouts."
I am making the movie first for myself and then for an audience. I don't really know what that audience is.
The film, starring Viggo Mortensen, Lea Seydoux, and Kristen Stewart, is a sci-fi body horror flick in which humans undergo painful malformations to adapt to their new artificial environments. Sure enough, there were plenty of audience members who left the theater in disgust, at least according to the New York Times' Kyle Buchanan on Twitter. It's certainly not the first time for the director, whose explosive movie Scanners was said to have prompted similar walkouts. Remember how Stephen King said that the only movie he ever walked out on was Transformers? That means he must not have seen the sequel to one of his own films, The Lawnmower Man 2: Beyond Cyberspace. We can say that with confidence too, as King himself hated the first movie so much, he sued the studio to have his name removed from the credits. The sequel was even worse, taking a simple thriller and turning it into mind-numbing schlock. And sure enough, many audience members didn't feel compelled to stick around. As a cheaply made, quickly slapped-together follow-up, Lawnmower Man 2: Beyond Cyberspace is an overly complex, poorly acted film with embarrassing special effects. Needless to say, it really isn't worth finishing. Critic Stacy Richter for the Tucson Weekly knew something was wrong right from the get-go, as the screening she attended had just 4 other patrons present. Little did she know just how bad it would be. She ended up doing the unthinkable. She walked, something forbidden for a movie critic. Richter wasn't the only one. Anecdotes can be found all over the web of horrified viewers who switched the sequel off before it ended. A decade before the Cloverfield monster reached the shores of New York, Roland Emmerich and Dean Devlin tried to do the same thing with Godzilla by bringing the iconic Japanese kaiju across the pond. Reviews were unkind, to say the least, as critics lambasted 1998's Godzilla as a dumbed-down, over-the-top FX spectacle with no soul and far too much bluster. Actor Kenpachiro Satsuma, who wore the Godzilla suit in the 1980s-era Toho films, said he walked out of the American remake, and many others did the same. All over forums online, you'll find die-hard fans of Godzilla who claim to have exited the theater mid-movie. Criticisms range from jabs at Godzilla's iguana-like redesign to complaints about the poor acting and plotting story. One Reddit user put it nicely, saying, "Incredibly boring. Boring enough that even though I was a poor kid, I was happy to lose the money I spent." For some, Godzilla 98 changed how they approach new releases. Another unhappy ticket holder on Reddit claimed they'd never go to see a movie on opening night ever again after Godzilla. This user pledged to instead wait for reviews to roll in. Regarded as one of the worst movies of all time, Battlefield Earth is based on a science fiction novel by L. Ron Hubbard. Unfortunately, the film version was also a passion project for Hubbard's Church of Scientology, and it has gained a reputation as a Scientology movie. Either way, the film is borderline incoherent, with haphazard editing and directing throughout. Meanwhile, the performances from its all-star cast, including John Travolta, Forrest Whitaker, and Kelly Preston, are so ham-fisted and cringeworthy, it quickly becomes an unintentional comedy. Essentially, Battlefield Earth is a big-budget B-movie, so it's no wonder audiences felt hoodwinked and wanted out before it was over. Viewers refer to its goofy plot points and comical attempts at serious science fiction storytelling when asked what forced them to leave the theater. Legendary critic Roger Ebert put it best in his review of the film, which begins with the bold statement, "Battlefield Earth is like taking a bus trip with someone who has needed a bath for a long time. It's not merely bad, it's unpleasant in a hostile way."
Stupid humans.
There are some movies that people walk out of that seem surprising in hindsight. A few, like 2001: A Space Odyssey, became all-time classics. Others seem promising when audiences file into the theater, only to disappoint, like 1998's Godzilla. Then there are those movies that look so bad even in the trailers that one has to question why people purchased tickets in the first place. One example is Battleship, a sci-fi action flick based on the iconic family board game that prompted more than one moviegoer to get going before it ended. Sure, the producers of Battleship could have simply gone for a straightforward naval war film. Instead, the filmmakers went as literal as possible by turning the little plastic gaming pegs into the devastating weapons of an invading armada of aliens. That didn't quite add up for audience members, many of which kicked it to the curb and left screenings early. Though the effects are top-notch and the action isn't terribly bad, the silly characters and nonsensical story are what really sank Battleship. While some movies are abandoned midway because they're boring, confusing, offensive, or just downright stupid, you'd be hard-pressed to find one that's all of those at the same time and more. But there's at least one franchise film that landed with a ton of hype and a fair amount of promise that sadly devolved into pathetic schlock, sending audiences to the exits before it was over. And that would be the 2018 clunker The Predator. Written and directed by Shane Black, who had worked on the 1987 original, there was plenty to be excited about when The Predator was first announced. Skeptical viewers probably should have stuck to their gut on this one though, as the movie is a total disaster from start to finish. Among the film's offenses, a sloppy story with poor action sequences, misguided attempts at humor that left fans feeling betrayed, and an autistic character whose role in the story offended many viewers. Over on Reddit, some were particularly irked by the film's use of autism as a major plot point. On BloodyDisgusting.com, though, fans seemed more upset by the movie's overly edgy comedy. One user commented, "Easily the worst in the series. I walked out of the cinema when the Predator used a detached arm to give someone the thumbs up." As the most expensive movie ever made at the time of its release, Kevin Costner's Waterworld is seen today as one of the biggest box office blunders in history. A highly anticipated sci-fi actioner, it stars Costner as a post-apocalyptic hero in a grim future world where water covers the earth and dry land has become all but a myth. A sort of reverse Mad Max, Waterworld had the potential to be the next big post-apocalyptic classic, but it wound up sinking in theaters instead. It received scathing reviews for its dismally uninteresting screenplay and wooden performances, and according to director Kevin Reynolds, it was also the victim of the dreaded walkout. Speaking to Newsweek in 2015, Reynolds discussed the poor early reception and the uphill battle he faced, especially from movie critics. He said, "The press wanted it to bomb. The head of Universal, Bill Washington, thought the bad publicity cost us at least $50 million in the box office. The reviews were painful. People didn't like it. I remember publicists saying that people walked out of a press screening." It wasn't just critics who left early. Waterworld regularly makes people's lists of movies they simply couldn't finish. Today, opinions on Waterworld have softened somewhat, but it's still an unfortunate blemish on Costner's otherwise sterling resume. Sometimes a lesser-known horror movie can shock audiences into leaving the theater too. Take the British indie flick Men, for example, which comes from Ex Machina director Alex Garland. The movie revolves around Harper Marlowe, a young widow who takes some time to herself in a remote village after the death of her husband, only to be terrorized by the strange people who live there. It's a surreal journey into the bizarre, a story full of unusual and disturbing imagery that's meant to shock, confound, and ultimately convey a message about toxic masculinity. Unfortunately, the movie was hated by some audiences and proved a little too unsettling for others, earning it some pretty harsh user reviews online. Some found Men so disturbing that they walked out. On Twitter and TikTok, users described the scene in theaters, with a number of users saying they'd walked out themselves after feeling too traumatized.
I can fully imagine it must be dreadful for you.
Still, while Men is clearly not a movie made for the squeamish, it received fairly solid reviews from critics upon its release. Darren Aronofsky is known for his intimate, intense character studies, which include movies such as The Whale and Black Swan. In 2017, however, Aronofsky wrote and directed Mother, a psychological horror movie that carries a number of religious and environmental themes. The movie stars Jennifer Lawrence as a young married woman whose husband, an author, labors under the pressure of writing his next great work. But after a stranger is reluctantly welcomed into their home, the man's wife and 2 adult sons follow. As the woman protests the new family's escalating disruptions, she becomes ever more confused by her husband's insistence on letting the intruding family into their home. Not nearly as straightforward a film as it sounds, Mother is full of symbolism, philosophy, and allegory. But unlike some horror movies, this film didn't prompt people to depart by terrifying them. Instead, it annoyed them. Maybe the deeper meaning of the story was lost on these viewers. Or maybe the less than literal nature of the story proved frustrating. Either way, users online from Reddit to Twitter described leaving the theater before it was over. Today, Mother stands as living proof that people don't always walk out of a horror movie because it's scary. If there's a modern-day equivalent to The Exorcist, a horror movie so traumatizing that it's instantly ranked among the most terrifying movies ever made, it's got to be Hereditary. Written and directed by Ari Aster, Hereditary begins with Annie Graham and her family grieving over the death of her mother. But in the wake of their loss, an even more grisly death occurs, and her attempts to commune with the lost loved one only reveal more secrets about the family's long lineage. Quickly gaining notoriety for its stunning twists and turns, Hereditary became one of the most talked about horror films in recent memory, and earned rave reviews from critics. Though the film plays to the fears of parents most of all, it terrified viewers of all ages. One particularly gruesome scene left audiences in enough shock that some viewers walked right out. We won't spoil anything for you, but suffice to say, it's not a particularly nice moment. Turns out Satan's got nothing on Ari Aster. Over the years, M. Night Shyamalan has become famous for directing movies with compelling mysteries capped off by jaw-dropping twists. After a string of hits in the 90s and 2000s, Shyamalan released 2008's The Happening, a movie that was heavily marketed around some great secret. Trailers for the movie teased a post-apocalyptic event, with cryptic clues that suggested an unknown attack of some sort was killing millions across the United States, affecting all of the biggest cities. Ultimately, the cataclysm turns out to be a toxin that causes victims to take their own lives. And the big twist is that it's not a terrorist attack or a man-made virus, but a naturally occurring phenomenon. A silly enough premise on its own, the film is also lambasted for its stilted performances, cringe-inducing dialogue, and sloppy script.
Just going to talk in a very positive manner, giving off good vibes. We're just here to use the bathroom.
It's apparently so bad, in fact, that The Happening regularly shows up on lists of movies that people say they walked out of. One online commenter said that the only thing memorable about the film was that they took the unusual step of leaving. They wrote, "My dad and I still talk about walking out of that theater to this day, so it left more of an impact on me than several other films." In the mid to late 90s, the internet was an emerging new medium, and so a number of sci-fi thrillers tried to capitalize on the mystery of the World Wide Web.
I want to get online. I need a computer.
Horror movies were a little late to the party, however. One of the first attempts to scare audiences with what might lurk on the internet was the 2002 slasher FeardotCom. The movie follows an NYPD detective who looks into a string of murders, leading him to a website that may be killing those who log on. That might sound like a fresh take on a ghostly slasher in theory. In practice, however, FeardotCom didn't score many points for originality, with critics such as Cynthia Fuchs of Pop Matters feeling it was just an updated version of Videodrome. Rip-off or not though, what it definitely lacked was a good script and satisfying scares. All in all, FeardotCom wound up being one of the worst horror movies of the decade, and proved terrible enough to spark some walkouts from moviegoers. Over on Reddit, a user replying to a topic about movies they'd walked out on cited FeardotCom, writing, "It was the only time I didn't care that I paid to watch a movie. It was just so awful." There aren't a ton of superhero horror movies out there, but Morbius took a bite at the subgenre in 2022. Based on a lesser-known Marvel character first introduced in the pages of The Amazing Spider-Man, Morbius was supposed to add to Sony's emerging shared universe based on characters from the Spider-Man franchise. The movie starred Jared Leto as Dr. Michael Morbius, a scientist who attempts to self-treat a debilitating blood disorder with an experimental serum that turns him into a vampiric monster. Forced to consume human blood to stay alive, Morbius blurs the line between good and evil in a battle with Milo, another unliving vampire like himself.
I'm starting to get hungry. You don't want to see me when I'm hungry.
Morbius enjoyed some major hype before its release, and quickly became even more famous for being absolutely terrible. Inspiring a full-blown meme craze, Morbius induced enough groans that fans went online to talk about how they'd abandoned the movie midway through, with one fan declaring on Reddit, "It was Morbin time to get the f*** out of that theater." In his review of the film, Nerdbot reviewer Derek Murray called it a barely passable attempt at filmmaking and lamented that he had not left the theater himself. The 2022 film The Outwaters was praised for bringing something new to the found footage subgenre. The story follows four friends who embark on a camping trip in the Mojave Desert that goes disastrously wrong. A film that may be a better work of visual art than it is a horror movie in the strictest sense, it was lauded by critics and attracted particular attention for its mesmerizing visuals and stunning use of sound. On the other end of the spectrum, audiences weren't quite as keen on the film, with many theater patrons less than thrilled about its gratuitous gore. And that use of sound? Well, for many, it actually induced dizziness and nausea. On Twitter, one user described their experience, writing, "The sound made me so uncomfortably dizzy that I had to leave the theater to vomit. This never happened to me before. It's more disturbing than scary, if that makes any sense." According to another moviegoer, the film proved so unsettling that it set off their Apple Watch's heart rate monitor. They wrote, "The Outwaters is one of the most deranged nightmares I've chosen to sit through in a while. I quite literally was trembling in multiple parts. The sound is absolutely hellish." It should come as no surprise that Eli Roth, the man behind such horror flicks as Hostel and Cabin Fever, made a movie that had audiences scurrying away from their seats. The film in question was The Green Inferno, a blood-soaked cannibal slasher that turned the dial up on the gore for the sake of sheer shock value. The film chronicles the travels of Justine, a woman who travels to the Amazon and discovers a tribe of indigenous cannibals. Green Inferno is a no-holds-barred shock fest, assaulting the audience with the most hideously vile imagery the director can dream up. It is so horrific, in fact, that Stephen King gave his seal of approval, calling it a glorious throwback to the drive-in movies of my youth. Bloody, gripping, hard to watch, but you can't look away. But while King himself couldn't take his eyes off the screen, some people couldn't even stay in the theater. In online discussions about movie walkouts, Green Inferno pops up fairly frequently. And it's not always due to the gore. As one commenter posted, "Reddit, f*** you for making me think this was a good movie."